Hello. If you've looked over our website, grokingwholeness.info, you've probably seen several references to sustainability. It seems that to achieve wholeness, you must be in balance and harmony with the external world. If we are not in harmony with the external world, it's impossible to be in harmony and balance within yourself. In discussing that balance and harmony, the subject of sustainability in the external environment comes up often. And along with that, the topic of exponential growth. So, what I would like to do this morning is talk to you about exponential growth and why it is so significant when talking about sustainability. So, let's begin. This is a typical curve of exponential growth, and it shows that how a population increases over time. And this is a typical chart. Depending upon what population you're talking about, whether it's microbes reproducing in a petri dish, or animals in a contained environment, or human beings around the globe, the curves all have a similar shape. But what exactly is exponential growth? What drives it? Why is it so difficult to appreciate? And why can it be so dangerous? So, in order to describe it, let me use a French fable that's often taught to young children about how exponential growth works. So, let's suppose I have a lily pond, and the pond is completely clear on the surface. And one day somebody comes along and puts one lily pad in the pond. And let's assume that that lily pad population doubles in coverage on the pond surface every day. And let's also assume that on day 30, the pond has been fully covered, suffocating all life in the pond. So you're sitting on the shore observing the pond every day. On what day do you begin to realize that the pond is in trouble? So let's follow the lily pad growth. On day one, obviously, there's nothing in the pond, so there's no surface area covered, so there's absolutely no problem with the pond. And so on day two, you don't hardly notice anything, one or two plants at most. Day three, and so on. Eventually, you get to a point, and let's call it day 25, where 3.1% of the pond is covered. Where I got that number, 3.125, will become obvious in a few minutes. Just bear with me. So certainly on day 25, assuming we double in area every day, there's certainly no problem. Only 3% of the pond is covered. On day 26, it doubles in area again, and now we're up to 6.25. Still no problem. 94% of the pond surface is uncovered. On day 27, it's over 10%, 12.5% to be exact. You start thinking that maybe there's a possible problem with the lily pads suffocating all life in the pond. On day 28, 25% of the pond is now covered. You realize you have a problem and you start thinking about how you're going to deal with it. On day 29, you're rounding up resources. And look, we're now up to 50% of the pond covered. We're doubling every day. You scramble to solve the problem. And if you don't scramble fast enough, on day 30, the pond is 100% covered. It's over. All life in the pond is now dead. So here's another way to describe the same thing in a graph. The graph shows the growth in the surface area covered over the 30-day period. And you'll notice until it gets around day 21 or 22, you can't even see any of the lines on the graph. And then all of a sudden around day 25, it begins to be noticeable. And you don't think much about it at first. And then all of a sudden there's a steep bend in the curve. And then it accelerates almost straight up the vertical line on the right. Exponential growth curves are often described as hockey stick curves because the shape of the curve resembles a hockey stick laid on its side. So note that when you get to the bend in the curve, things are about to spiral out of control. And the important thing to remember, there's very little time to react, to change course once you recognize that there is a problem with the pond. So let's take a look at the human population growth on planet Earth for the last 67,000 years. From 65,000 BC all the way to 40,000 BC, we were basically hunter-gatherers and had very limited use of tools. And the human population is estimated to be a little less than 1 million worldwide. Around 40,000 years ago, we started hunting and fishing with basic weapons. And you see that this was a dramatic improvement for the life of humans on the planet. And our population increased to 6 million in a very short period of time. And it roughly stayed that way for the next 25,000 years. There was some variation due to climate changes, very warm weather or very cold weather. And then we discovered agriculture around 10,000 years ago. And what happened again? Things really took off. And you can see that the start of the Industrial Revolution, we're up to 1 billion people. At the end of World War II, the population of the planet in 1945 was estimated to be around 2.5 billion people. Today, it's estimated to be 8.2 billion people. It's more than tripled in size in 80 years. And 80 years is within the lifespan of many people that are still alive on the planet today. So the question is, do you think we might have a problem? If you don't think it's population per se, well, what about all the things that human population requires? Food to eat, both plant and animal, fresh water, energy generation and transportation, housing for all the people, clothing, appliances, medical and dental services, sanitation and waste, transportation, cars, trucks, buses, planes, etc. Entertainment devices, TVs, PCs, phones, sports, material possessions. As standard of living increases and people get wealthy, they get all kinds of material possessions that aren't necessities of life, but certainly would be nice to have. And of course, with all that comes resource consumption, the raw resources of the planet. And let's not forget about the infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, water pipes, energy transmission facilities, and so on. And along with all that comes pollution. I'm sure there's many other things we could add to the list as well, but I think those are some of the major categories we need to think about. So essentially, what all this means is that when you have a closed system like planet Earth, exponential growth is not sustainable. Eventually, you consume all the resources to sustain the population. And right now, we have a number of warning signs on the horizon. Some of them are making a lot of noise already. For example, oil and gas reserves are estimated to peak within this decade. There's only so much of that stuff buried in the ground. Steel is another area, iron ore, lumber, which is a renewable resource, unless you consume so much of it so fast that it doesn't have a time to regenerate properly. Sand for concrete is becoming a problem. We have beaches all over the world, but not any kind of sand is good for making concrete. Sand is also used in windows and in semiconductors. So there's lots of areas where already we're getting to the point where we just can't develop the natural resources fast enough if we can develop them at all. And by the way, for a major new copper mine, for example, or something like that, to build out the infrastructure to really make a productive mine, first you have to find a new copper resource buried in the ground. And then to get all the permits and all the equipment necessary to actually do the mining and begin mining to scale, that is a process that takes 10 years on a good day. So do we have any good news in the future? Well, it turns out we do. In the developed world and in parts of the developing world, population is leveling off and even declining. You can see on the chart here that in North America and in Europe and in South America, for the most part, the population is already pretty close to leveling off. Why is that? Well, as standards of living increase, where families used to require lots of labor to sustain themselves on a farm, they would have lots of children to handle all the chores that were necessary to ensure a decent life. But as standard livings increased, people found out that they didn't need as many children anymore to ensure their comfortable future. So they started having less kids. And if you haven't noticed lately, raising kids these days in the developing world is very expensive. Well, the same thing is now happening in the developing world as well. And they're going to want their piece of the pie as well. Countries like China, Japan, Germany, Italy are already experiencing declining populations, and that poses another problem. We'll get to that in a minute. The question to ask yourself, is this too little, too late? And by the way, there's another issue as well with the declining population, which is a real concern in some of the countries I just mentioned. If the population of that country declines too rapidly, there won't be enough workers to support the aging population as they reach retirement age. And if it gets serious enough, that could lead to societal collapse. That's the other side of the coin. So let's talk about the good and the bad. The good news, we still may have a few decades to course correct. The bad news, we may only have a few years to course correct. It's not going to happen simultaneous around the world. Some countries will experience it before others. And particularly in the developing world where they don't have the financial resources, they may experience it first. Now is the time to act. I'd like to leave you with this quote from Chief Seattle, who the city of Seattle, Washington is named after. He lived from 1790 to the mid 1800s. And he is noted for all kinds of interesting quotes about sustainability. This is one that requires some thinking, though. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. I may not see the implications of what I described in this presentation. My children will, and my grandchildren will, and their grandchildren, if there are any left. The time to act is now. Thank you for your attention.